So building on that conversation, I'd love to welcome some additional panelists to the stage here for a conversation on AI and the SDGs and how we move from hype to reality. So Togo is one strong example of that, and we're about to hear of some others. So I'd love to welcome to the stage Nasrat Khalid. He's the founder and CEO of Aseel app. Nasrat, welcome. I'll just go ahead and introduce them one by one as they take the stage. Aseel is an e-commerce startup with a hybrid model that allows people to buy handmade goods and send aid packages primarily in Afghanistan, and you'll hear more. Come take a seat over here. Thank you. Toby Norman is the CEO of Simprints, which is a nonprofit technology company focused on biometric identity solutions. You just heard biometrics mentioned for low resource settings. Claire Malamed is the CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which is focused on ensuring data can be put to good use to achieve the SDGs, a lot of what we're talking about today. And finally, Priya Vora, who's the CEO of the Digital Impact Alliance, which works with investors, policymakers, and other stakeholders to do digital right, and we'll talk about what that means. So thank you all so much. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation and appreciate you all taking the time. You know, we all know, and we're probably tired of hearing all the ways in which AI is disrupting every industry, and of course the industries we all work on, foreign aid, global health, humanitarian response, no exception, and many examples we'll hear of today. But in this conversation, we're going to talk about how do we go from a lot of small-scale innovation to large-scale transformation. And the vision for this panel was to bring together a couple innovators who are doing exciting work in terms of technology and low-resource settings, and then a couple leaders working on the systems and the architecture and kind of the less sexy side, if you will, of technology, right? The data, the digital public infrastructure that really needs to come together in order to move from hype to reality, and just all having a conversation together. So I'd love to start with Nasrat, and then we'll hear from our other panelists. So Aseel, as Devex reported, originally launched with the goal of being sort of like an Etsy-like marketplace for handcrafts from Afghanistan. But since August 2021, Aseel has transformed into a fundraising and aid distribution platform, and you've really repurposed those same supply chains to focus on the humanitarian crisis in your home country. So I wonder if you can talk about that and maybe why your work in Afghanistan is an example of this real gap between hype and reality for AI.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. Yep, audible. So yeah, allow me to introduce Aseel a little bit. It's a mobile app, a web platform, iOS, Android, on your phones right now. And we do two things: buy good, where we initially started the marketplace, with the idea of enabling, the success we saw from Etsy, for instance, is a $16 billion company just an hour drive from here. And we know most of global production or, carving of handmade items happens in underdeveloped countries. So what is stopping them from coming on to the digital economy, based on what we really deep dived into, was payments infrastructure and supply chain infrastructure. So if you give countries a payment infrastructure and a supply chain infrastructure, they would be able to partake in the digital economy. So we created that 2017 to 2021 with that infrastructure being built. Obviously, the country collapsed. And so we were able to then use the same infrastructure that we had within days to go from getting handmade items delivered to the US and Australia and Canada to now getting donations and sending them to people that we identified through our own homemade ID system. And then in addition, created a further line of individuals within the country. Think of them as the Uber Eats drivers within here, for example, in the US, to do that delivery of aid to specific families, do identification, and further do more work in that way.
And I think what's so interesting about your model, first, it points to the need for technology. You talked about identification of beneficiaries, which we'll hear more from Toby on ID in a moment. But also, while technology is key to your model, people also play a key role, right? It's people actually getting aid. And when I want to come back to you to ask, what can be some of the lessons for these larger aid organizations trying to serve people in these contexts? I mean, Aseel was really getting aid to people who were being left behind by some of these large aid agencies. So we'll get back to that. But I want to bring Toby in here because Toby, Simprints is working to tackle a huge challenge, which is really about identity. 850 million people around the world lack proof of identity. So when we talk about the potential of AI, I mean, if you can't actually prove who you are, you can't access a lot of the benefits that might be digitally enabled. So can you tell us a little bit more about that foundational challenge, and how is Simprints working to address that?
Yeah, sure. Let me speak both, I think, to the opportunity, but also candidly to some of the risks that I think we should be grappling with. The Goalkeepers report released last week said that we've learned more in the past 10 years about protecting the health of mothers and children worldwide than we did in the century before that. And that's exciting. That's something I'm optimistic about. That's a huge win for the sector. But those innovations mean nothing if we don't actually get them to the mothers and children who need them most, right? The potential of AI for me isn't just the question of can we develop the new tools, the diagnostics, the drugs, the vaccines, but can we use it to actually make sure it's getting to every person who needs it? Yeah. So at Simprints, we build privacy-first digital ID powered by biometrics so that health workers can help identify patients on the front lines and verify care is getting to them. We're coming to the end now of a multi-year deep R&D journey with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to see could we bring down the usable age of children's biometrics, a child's fingerprints, so that you could actually link it to a vaccine record and make sure that every vaccine, including the really breakthrough malaria vaccines, are getting to the right children at the right time. And what I'm optimistic about, the positive side of the story, is that this morning the Minister of Health of Ghana and Gavi announced taking this technology, which has just finally gotten from 5 years down to 9 months, to expand in Ghana to 500,000 children for 11 million doses of vaccines over the next 3 years. And that's heard it first here at Devex. That's the excitement. The risk, and the thing that worries me the most, is that I'm not hearing in the conversations at the UNGA this week enough talk about educating policymakers. Heard a lot about regulation, but not enough people who could candidly put their hands up and say, yes, I have voted for a lawmaker recently because I feel that they're competent to legislate AI, or have even written to their policymakers or their legislators. And second, the investment in the safety technology we need to make this actually work. When nuclear energy came onto the scene, it took 50 years for some of the associated safety technologies to keep up. Where would we be on clean energy if we had invested in passive cooling from the get-go? I've heard no one talk about cryptography or detecting viruses, some things that I think will be critical to make these tools safe.
Yeah, great points, thank you. And I hope we can come back to some of your points on risk. I want to bring Claire into this because Claire, a lot of the conversations I have around AI and low resource settings, often I get pushback that it's premature to have those conversations because the data infrastructure is so lacking. And so I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that challenge, the lack of quality data in some of these contexts that really holds back progress on AI. And what are you working to do to address that? What more needs to be done?
Thank you. This is the first time for about 10 days that I've been more than 4 blocks away from the UN, so I'm feeling a little bit of vertigo here. But it's great to be here. No, I mean, I think the challenges are real, but I think it's also absolutely essential that we overcome them. And I think, the example that Toby just gave us, or that we heard from the Minister of Togo, shows that you can overcome them. That presumably getting the benefits from ID relies on being able to process the data which is contained within the system to tell you who are those mothers, who are those children, and so on. So we know it's an entirely solvable problem. I think it's absolutely critical that we do solve it, and fast, because, as we keep hearing, data and the AI technologies digital technologies that are built on data is where economic growth and progress is going to come from in the future. So if we're not solving that problem, we're just storing up a huge amount of future inequality between countries that are and aren't able to quickly leverage the benefits of this technology, shape it in a way which works for their markets, for their needs. So it's absolutely imperative that we do. We just launched at the UN on Sunday the Power of Data initiative, which is bringing together a group of governments that have the political commitment to solve this problem with partners. I think a lot of the challenges in the world of data have been because it tends to get stuck at a slightly technical level. And we look at lots of solutions. There are many solutions, but until you have political interest and momentum to put the money in, to create to kind of bang heads together in institutions and make sure that data is shared and so on, you're not going to get the change. So I think on Sunday, we really saw that sort of pivot and a group of countries saying, yep, we get that this is a technical problem, but the solutions are to be found in politics, and we're going to get together and do that. So I do feel optimistic about it at the moment.
That's always good to hear. I want to go to Priya because we've heard about digital ID, we've heard about data, and I know that a term that often comes up when we talk about digital technology and AI and the SDGs is digital public infrastructure. And I do the air quotes because it's just one of those jargony terms that I think make people tune out. So I want to break down the jargon and better understand, or help our audience better understand, what is digital public infrastructure? Why is it so critical in helping go from hype to reality when we talk about AI and the SDGs? And can you give us a specific example of what that looks like? We just heard from Minister Lawson about Togo. Maybe what's another example of where that works?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm really delighted to be here, and it's nice to be on the stage with people getting their hands dirty and doing some real work. And although I'll take issue with the fact that we are doing the unsexy stuff, I'll do my best
I think
to,
it's sexy, but
to
you know,
say
not
that
everyone agrees.
it is indeed, if not sexy, a very, very important.
Absolutely.
You know, the term digital public infrastructure might be a new term, but it's an old concept. And I think of it much more as a metaphor, as really trying to convey that to run a modern state or a modern economy requires some pretty fundamental things in place, just like trains and roads and whatever railroads of the past. Digital infrastructure is increasingly necessary. So you heard Aseel talk about, you know, the work he's doing wouldn't be possible if there wasn't a payment solution, if there wasn't a way to have some way to identify folks, if there wasn't a way to, you know which dwellings you have and where people live. And there's just it's kind of the underlying plumbing that makes all of these applications thrive. So as we want to see more innovators like Aseel out there, it really requires building on the political will to lay these foundations and lay this infrastructure. My concern isn't that it's kind of those who will or those who won't, but the fact is you can have ID systems that do more harm than good. You can have payment systems that lead to more not necessarily exclusion, but maybe rent seeking than is necessary. So, you know, when Minister Lawson's up here and she's saying, I'm designing for the, you know, $1 a day 2G phone user, that extreme focus on inclusion is going to lead you to choices in not only your policy environment, but in your technology solutions that are going to either maximize inclusion or not, maximize trust or not, maximize you know, individuals' agency and control and transparency over data or not. And I think the whole DPI world is really not just saying we need these foundations, but we need to do it in a way that really puts people at the center and really tries to drive for those kind of more radical sense of inclusion and trust.
So let's lean into this discussion on risk for a moment, because Priya, you were just mentioning some of these models can actually do more harm than good, depending on how they're designed. And would love to hear from any of you on this, but actually, Nasrat, it'd be interesting to hear in the context of Afghanistan, some of the people who could most benefit from the work Aseel is doing could also be the most at risk by having their information out there, perhaps in a way that isn't secure. So would love to hear from you how you think about risk in Afghanistan, and then others can jump in on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So I'd take a little step back in terms of how did we get to this point where we are creating solutions for feeding people, literally, by the end of the day. So, I mean, taking a step back, 2017, I left the World Bank. I used to work with the World Bank for 7 years, and the reason I left was that I was told you have too much focus on tech. So we need to get that mentality, and everybody needs to know how we think in these broader, bigger institutions like the World Bank and the UN and others. So with that mindset, when we started working on the infrastructure, at the time, the payment infrastructure for the most part is built by me and a team of 40 people. The infrastructure that the country had was created in tranches on every 5 years. There's a project from the World Bank for so-and-so ministry. There's a project from USAID for so-and-so ministry. The underlying infrastructure was built in a very scattered way with billions of dollars thrown in there. So one is when the country collapsed, and this is August 2021, we saw that in the news. Everyone left, including the UN, including any broader institution that had been there. So when everybody was leaving, we were creating these solutions, and that required a lot of resilience from the community, and a very, very big amount of understanding of the local community. So I think comparatively, when we look at our food delivery, and we've now delivered food to 500,000 people, and they are all going through this identification system. They are all delivered through local heroes with the Uber Eats model. And we look at, as entrepreneurs, as tech-focused startups, we look at top-of-the-game technology. I'm not sitting here, as the director of, some big institution. We're going out there to the newest technology that we can find, but also mixing that with the local understanding of the situation. That is exactly how you can get a system until the time that we can then feed this into a broader, bigger system. I would think that, localization, bringing local people and empowering them is going to enable you to do this safely in a local manner, the physical safety, and then connecting to the best of the game in the tech sector is going to give you that tech security that you're looking for.
I want to jump in with a question here. So Aseel was really filling a void, right, in a time of crisis in Afghanistan. And yet, it's not always an either or of, disruptors and innovative models coming in, or these large legacy organizations that perhaps need to speed up technology adoption. It can be a both and I want to hear a little bit more from others here. Minister Lawson was just mentioning partnerships. Yes, she's a champion for technology, but she's also worked with external partners to, pursue that model of precision aid we talked about. Toby just mentioned a big partnership Simprints announced today with other big organizations. So what do you see as the role of partnerships in moving from hype to reality on AI and the SDGs? And back to that point on risk, how partnerships can help in digital transformation, but also how partnerships can help manage on risk.
I mean, I run a global partnership, so I obviously think partnerships are important. But I think partnerships are important, but like any other part of the puzzle, they can deliver differently depending on the context in which they're delivering. So absolutely, and more than ever in technology, a lot of the new technologies, a lot of the capacity, a lot of the actual physical infrastructure that we need is held in the private sector, in civil society. So, absolutely, if you're trying to create a kind of national level infrastructure and government is to be involved, you need those public-private partnerships. But I think what you really need to make that successful and to make sure that those contribute to building a sort of overall system is for those partnerships to be developed in the context of an overall political strategy. I mean, your point about the danger of fragmentation and lots of different things being built absolutely resonated with me in terms of the data system. And what we see again and again in data is a project here, let's run a household survey, or a project there, let's boost this, let's boost the data system in this sector, or let's collect data to overcome this specific problem. And they're all worthwhile things. But if they're not happening within a strategy, you're missing a huge opportunity for those things to sort of together contribute to building a system, to use the data over and over again. You're essentially just making those investments much less efficient than they should be, and doing less good than you could be with those resources. So I think partnerships are critical, but they work best when they're in the context of a really strong overall strategy.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there. Priya, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's a key part of investing in partnerships in my mind is also just a lot of the peer learning. I think it's important to put in context that I don't think there's one country has figured it out in terms of driving digital inclusion and digital equity, has competitive markets and where there's real trust in how data is being used. And the fact that nobody's figured it out means that there's so much opportunity for investing in problem solving together. Aseel, you said, we wanted to get connected and learn from the brightest out there. And Minister Lawson said she wanted to learn from, she contacted Esther Duflo. And then, it turns out how many countries are now going to Togo to ask them, how did you do that registration the way you did? They're becoming the center of gravity for a lot of these kind of lower resource settings on I don't know, sometimes nitty-gritty matters, but just having the forum for more of these practitioners to connect to one another and really kind of find some peers, I think is really, really, really important.
Toby, I want to ask you something. So you mentioned a new partnership today around malaria, which is very exciting. But I actually think it would be helpful to hear from some of Simprints' past work when we talk about moving from hype to reality. You mentioned today all the innovation in maternal newborn health, but it's about getting those innovations to people who can benefit. What's an example of Simprints' work that maybe points to how partnership can deliver, points to how partnerships can deliver not just the tech, but ways to manage the risk? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Let me just take one example that we touched on a little bit earlier today, verifying the delivery of trachoma surgeries. So we've heard earlier how important eye care is, and what genuinely, not in a conceptual way, what genuinely that means for a patient who has a single surgery and goes from nearly blind to be able to see. Well, what does that mean for their life, their economics, their family? One of the huge challenges we have is as we try and deliver these life-saving, life-changing frontline interventions, it's incredibly hard to truly trace where they're going to deliver and where not, especially at scale. Right? So some of the data that we flow up that's been moving in this space, there are estimates that 30 to 45% of all digital health data out there is either over or underreporting, and is not accurate, and is not usable. So when we're thinking about the big numbers, beyond the pilot phase, but the big numbers, the national numbers, how do we really trust the accuracy of that data? That's a place we've been working that I think has a lot of opportunity. For example, Simprints partnering with the Ministry of Health in Ethiopia and SIF, a funder, to verify the delivery of these trachoma surgeries to hundreds of thousands of patients. That's a moment of opportunity. The question that I ask myself, and the one I don't think we've solved yet as a sector, is how do we line up the incentives so as we do that, we can really focus all of our efforts on the stuff that actually matters, which is getting those things there, which I think influences the super sexy, super important infrastructure elements of it, as well as the funding, so that everyone is pulling to that final point, because it doesn't matter if we have great ideas and they don't actually get to people.
Mm-hmm. Agreed there. So speaking of that, getting great ideas to people, we have just a couple minutes left, and I want to end with a question for you all about the role of the UN. So we're all here for the UN General Assembly, and I think a big question on my mind, and I'm sure we'll ask this tomorrow when we meet with the UN Tech Envoy, is what is the UN's role? What role should the UN play, or what role should it not play when it comes to AI and the SDGs and going from hype to reality? So we'll end with that. Just want to hear briefly from each of you. What's your one message on the role the UN should or should not play in this space? Maybe we'll start with Priya.
So I'll go first, and because I have a very specific ask, and Doreen answered a lot of this question on kind of the high-level policy front, but I think the UN and the whole family of institutions sits on gobs and gobs of data. And if we really want AI to serve everyone everywhere. I think we need to do a lot to ensure all these stranded data assets get unlocked meaningfully and securely. And I think, they should put their money where their mouth is.
Thanks for that. Claire?
I mean, I think, the UN does a lot of things, some of them better than others, but I think the primary need, which we need the UN for and no other institution can really do at this point, is the norm setting. The UN has a kind of absolutely unparalleled legitimacy in norm setting, which comes from its convening power, from the fact that, every member state is represented. We heard at the end of the interview with Doreen earlier how, the challenges of that, all the things which are best about the UN, the democracy, the breadth, the convening power, are also the things that are kind of most difficult about the UN, that it's really, really hard to reach consensus, that, we're in a very fractured world and the UN can't change that. But the UN is the only place that has the convening power and the legitimacy to actually really set the new norms within which hopefully we can all work.
Thank you, Claire. Toby?
I think that's great. And the power for me is convening with focus. If we want to unlock the potential of AI, beyond the hype, and actually do it in a way that's like safe, ethical, responsible, inclusive. How do we get Tedros to wake up and worry about what it really means to have privacy with AI tools for frontline patients? I think if we could do that, we could get a ton of focus there and move the needle.
Great point. Nasrat,
Yeah,
we'll
so
close with you.
I'm more tunnel vision right now because I'm focused on humanitarian. So I will do specifically WFP. So just by the end of today in New York City, there's going to be 3 million deliveries done. That's food deliveries, package deliveries, you name it. Just in this city today, 3 million deliveries are happening, and people exactly know which restaurant it's coming from, who cooked it, how did it get to me, who brought it to me, at what time did it get to me. But then when we look at feeding people in Afghanistan, we have to put a programming committee. $4 billion is not enough. We have no idea where the money is going, to whom it's going. There's no identification tools. There's nothing. So a specific ask for WFP. Focus on policy. Bring people together. Fundraise. You do not need to do logistics. You don't need to do deliveries. You don't need to do procurement and things like that. Leave that to startups. And that, I think one point of that is, we have something called Direct Aid Beta. It's a demonstration of, get your phone, download the Aseel app, buy a $39 package. You will know where it's going. You will also get a video of the guy delivering it. We did that intentionally to prove a point. I think if we get the UN to do the policy work and make it easy for us, Toby and others, to really do the work, it would be amazing. And we might get countries with less hunger.
Thank you, Nasrat. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists today. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.